The rain tapped on the windows of a small restaurant on the outskirts of New York. It was late autumn, and the evening city slowly sank into a continuous flow of lights and sounds. At one of the window tables sat Jackson Storm, a man who had seen more in his life than most people. He was nearing 70, but his eyes remained sharp, just like in his youth. They had witnessed war, death, losses. But they had also seen honor, friendship, and moments when humanity mattered more than weapons. He had once been a Marine. He had gone through 2 wars, earned several medals that now gathered dust in an old box. His wife had passed away 10 years ago, and his son lived on the other side of the country, rarely calling. His home now was a small apartment filled with books and memories. He didn't have many needs. Just warm food, a quiet evening, and a bit of good whiskey. That was his daily ritual. But even at his age, life sometimes threw challenges his way. The man no one sees at the opposite end of the restaurant, sitting at a table, was John Cena. He held his phone in his hands, but barely looked at it. He was used to people looking at him. He was used to autographs, cameras, and crowds. But what he had never gotten used to was the loneliness that followed all of that. At 47, he was still a legend. A wrestler, an actor, a hero. But who was he really? Once, as a child, he dreamed of simple things. Having a home, a family, people to trust. But fame had done its work. True friends were almost gone, relationships didn't work out, and his life had become a string of shoots, workouts, and endorsement deals. Why was he here, in this small restaurant? Because sometimes he just wanted to feel like an ordinary person. John lifted his gaze and saw the veteran. The old man looked tired but proud. Something about him made John curious. Little did he know that their fates would soon intersect. In the far corner of the restaurant sat a group of 3 young men. They were dressed in expensive tracksuits, and gold bracelets gleamed on their wrists. They looked arrogant, obnoxious, laughing loudly and acting as if the place belonged only to them. The leader of the group was Trevor Blake, a 24-year-old from a wealthy family. His father owned several electronics stores, so Trevor had never worked but always had money. Next to him sat Mikey, shorter in stature but quick and sly. His eyes constantly darted around the room, looking for someone to mock or a wallet to snatch. The third in the group was Ryan, big and silent, but always ready to agree with his friends. He wasn't particularly smart, but he had received praise from Trevor for his strength on more than one occasion. When Jackson walked into the restaurant, Trevor was the first to notice him. "Look at this old guy," he said, elbowing Mikey. "An old man with scars. Probably a veteran, just like my grandpa. Always sitting and telling stories about the wars. Why are they all so gloomy?" Mikey chuckled. "Because they know they'll never get their youth back. And they think we owe them something," added Ryan, smirking. Trevor pulled out his phone and started recording. "Should we make a video? Old man tries to explain what honor is, but gets a free lesson in modern life." "Genius." Mikey laughed. They waited until the old man made his order, and as soon as he sat down they started. "Hey, Grandpa, are you looking for your lost sword by any chance?" Trevor shouted. "Or maybe your battalion left you here?" Jackson calmly raised his eyes. He wasn't new to situations like this. But this time, things were different. John Cena, a few tables away, was already watching the situation. He set his phone down, took his last sip of water, and slowly stood up. John Cena sat still, watching the guys closely. His fingers involuntarily clenched into a fist, but he didn't get up yet. He knew people like them. He had once grown up with bullies too. He was strong, tough, and everyone thought he'd become just another street thug. But his father, a former police officer, once said, "Real strength isn't in your fists. It's the ability to decide when to use them." Later, John realized that his muscles could either cause harm or be useful. He chose sports, wrestling, and later, acting. But even after all his victories, he often asked himself, What if I had chosen a different path when I was younger? Now in front of him sat three young men, arrogant, audacious, convinced that everything was allowed for them. He saw in them those who had never received a real lesson in life. Jackson held himself with dignity, not reacting to the insults, but John knew it didn't matter. Sooner or later, weak people always go too far. His heart began to race. He felt that the next few moments would determine everything. "You have a choice, John," his father's voice echoed in his head again. He took a deep breath and slowly stood up from his seat. John Cena slowly walked up to the table where the three guys were sitting. He moved calmly, without sudden movements, but his presence was palpable. The restaurant grew quieter. People noticed that something was happening. Trevor was the first to see him and raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Wow, it's John Cena himself," he said with feigned admiration. "What, you want an autograph?" John didn't smile. He looked the guys in the eye and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Do you know who's sitting before you?" Mikey snorted. "What? Some veteran. So what? They all love it when people pity them." Cena took a deep breath, holding himself back. "He's not just a veteran. This man gave part of his life so you could live in a free country. So you could sit here, mock, not think about war, death, and loss." "Oh, don't start with that talk," Trevor said dismissively, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't ask him to fight for me. Let him live his life, not come here with his 'I defended the country' speech." John moved closer and leaned down toward him, looking straight into his eyes. "You never know when you might need help. And if that happens, I hope someone's there to help you, even if you didn't ask for it." Ryan and Mikey exchanged awkward glances, but Trevor still held his ground. "Listen, Mr. Muscles, are you going to prove your point with your fists?" He smiled again, but this time less confidently. Cena remained silent. He still had one more chance to give them the opportunity to leave peacefully. "I suggest you apologize to this man and leave quietly." Mikey and Ryan were about to do just that, but Trevor couldn't stop. "And if not, what will you do? Break my arm?" And then John realized words were no longer enough. He took a step forward. John Cena took a decisive step forward and grabbed Trevor by the hoodie, pulling him toward him. The guy, who had been smiling just a second ago, immediately felt everything around him change. "You can't do that," John snapped, lifting Trevor to meet his gaze. "You think you can get away with anything? That it's okay to mock people just because they're older or weaker? You have no idea what people pay for you to sit here and laugh." Trevor tried to break free, but John tightened his grip on his hoodie, not letting him move. "You don't even understand," John continued, his voice growing deeper and more aggressive. "You've never felt what it's like to lose everything. To lose friends, family, a life you loved. You sit here laughing and mocking people who've been through real hell so you could live like you do now." Trevor flinched, but didn't dare respond. John looked at him as though he were tearing his soul apart with his gaze. "You think your family, your money, will protect you from real life," John said, now even angrier. "When all of this goes down the drain, when you're left alone with no support, you'll regret being like this. And all that will be left is your pride. And let me tell you straight, pride won't give you anything. It's just a mask you hide behind to shield yourself from the world." The entire restaurant fell silent as Trevor nervously swallowed. He was shocked by the aggression from someone he had once seen as a celebrity, and now felt like he was facing a real man, one willing to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. "You have a chance, Trevor," John continued, not letting go. "A choice. You can change, understand what it means to be a man. Not like you are now, with disrespect and arrogance. But a real man, one who knows how to apologize and understands that not everything in life depends on your money or strength." Trevor silently lowered his head as he heard those words. His eyes no longer held the confidence they had just moments before. John let go of him, but his voice remained low and firm. "Next time you laugh at someone, remember, you don't know who you're really dealing with. And respecting people is what will make you a real man. He took a step back, turning to Jackson, leaving Trevor standing with a feeling he had never experienced, shame, one that would soon crush his confidence. Trevor stood, clenching his fists, but he could no longer maintain his confident posture. An unpleasant feeling, something new and bitter, stirred in his chest. He glanced at his friends, but they turned away, unsure of what to say. Everyone understood that what had just happened couldn't be left without consequences. Cena slowly turned back to Jackson. His face remained serious, but his eyes still held the self-respect he had managed to maintain throughout all his years of fighting. He took the veteran's hand and squeezed it in a friendly gesture. "Thank you for not letting him go further," John said quietly and respectfully. Jackson simply nodded, saying nothing. He didn't need words. He knew it was the right thing. Trevor, Mike, and Ryan sat at the table, silently staring at their phones, not knowing what to do next. Time, which they were used to controlling, now felt unexpectedly thick and heavy. Trevor tried to say something, but the words didn't come. Eventually, John and Jackson left the restaurant, leaving behind a sense of discomfort and respect that lingered in the air. They were no longer just two men with different life paths. This moment had become a meeting of two people who had seen what most would never see. They felt how life could shape characters and how important it was to remain true to one's principles, even when everything around changes. Their silent company was better than any words. Cena sat in a small restaurant on the outskirts of New York, watching the street through the large window, which was fogged up from the rain. The winds had once again brought the autumn chill, and people hurried home, hiding under umbrellas. But for John, this evening was different. He no longer sought to feel part of the world, as he had a few weeks ago. Now, he was looking for peace and rest after everything that had happened in the past. Since that incident in the restaurant, everything had changed, not just for the boys he met, but for him as well. He felt it was time to put a period at the end of that chapter in his life. However, it wasn't as simple as he initially thought. The fame he had gained in the world of wrestling movies and show business was only a part of his life. He had a huge experience behind him, but sometimes even for someone like him, the hardest thing was simply leaving everything in the past. He took a sip from the cup in front of him and glanced around the room again. It was a regular restaurant on the outskirts of the city. Tourists and celebrities didn't come here. It was a place for locals. But for him, this was his first attempt to return to ordinary life, a step toward not being constantly under the spotlight. It was quiet here, only the sound of the rain tapping against the glass and the faint hum of conversation. John felt his body slowly relax, but his thoughts remained on the same wave as a few weeks ago. He still remembered those boys, Trevor, Mikey, and Ryan. They weren't bad people. They were just the type who hadn't seen the world in the right light. Their self-confidence, their carelessness about everything concerning others, that was something John couldn't ignore. And although he understood that they had changed, he still felt that their journey was just beginning. But right now, he wasn't thinking about that. Instead of sitting and pondering, he looked at his watch. Just past 10 in the evening. He spotted the old man again, the one he noticed a few weeks ago. Jackson Storm, the man whose life story had more depth than any celebrity or star in show business. He wasn't just a veteran. He was a symbol of the fact that life could be more complicated and layered than it seemed at first glance. John often wondered why life gave certain moments when two people could meet, when their paths crossed. Maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe each of us is looking for a way to leave a mark on this world. Sometimes it's just one meeting that changes everything. John raised his gaze, and his eyes met Jackson's. It was a sign. He knew he couldn't just sit there drinking his coffee while the old man sat alone, because he had seen it before, familiar faces, familiar gazes, familiar lonely moments. He took a few steps until he reached the table where Jackson sat. "Jackson." John greeted him with a smile. "I'm glad to see you again." The man looked up, and a faint smile flashed in his eyes. He was surprised but not shocked. He just seemed to sense that this moment had come. John invited him to sit. "I thought you'd still be at home," John said. "You don't often meet someone with as much life experience as you. I'm glad we're meeting again." Jackson sat at the table. John's gaze was sincere. He felt that this meeting was necessary to put a period at the end of their shared path. Maybe it wouldn't matter to everyone, but it did to them. Recently, John had begun to realize that he couldn't just be a man from the screen. He couldn't leave everything behind and live solely for fame or money. He wanted to be someone who could be helpful, someone who could bring even a little peace to those who needed it. "You know, I never told you why I decided to come up that day," John said after both of them had ordered food. "You're not just a veteran. You live a story that I may never fully understand. But you didn't stay where you were. I respect that." Jackson looked at John and paused for a moment. "You know why we often sit in places like this restaurant?" he asked, looking at the people around. "Because we're looking for peace. Maybe sometimes we're still trying to find meaning in why we had to go through all of that. But when you've been through as much as I have, you start to realize that not everything needs to make sense. Sometimes you just have to sit and accept what is." John nodded, taking in his words. "It's like wrestling. You're always looking for the win, but sometimes all you get is the satisfaction of the process itself." John paused. "Maybe that's why I wanted to invite you, Jackson. Not just to talk, but to feel what it's like to be part of something real." They sat together, silently, at the table, eating and occasionally glancing at each other, understanding that this meeting was important. They both had been through a lot, and they both knew that now, sitting here in this small restaurant, they could just be people looking for peace and understanding. Mikey, Trevor, and Ryan, the same boys who once laughed at Jackson and didn't understand him, were sitting at their own table. They no longer laughed, no longer teased the people around them. Their self-confidence had disappeared somewhere, and maybe it was because they saw how someone could stand up for others. They no longer looked like they had everything under control. It was a moment of change. And for John and Jackson, it was a moment when they both felt that even at the most insignificant stage of life, one could find strength. And so, sitting together, both of them understood. Life doesn't always give answers, but in those quiet moments, one can find real peace. And sometimes that is the most valuable thing.